Buried deep under an unmarked forest trail near the German-Czech border was a secret no one was supposed to find. For decades, the ground above looked ordinary, just soil, trees, and silence. But beneath it lay a massive structure, the heart of the Luftwaffe's hidden operation bunker. Unlike other ruins of World War II, there were no bomb craters, no signs of battle, and no survivors left to speak of it. The Allies never touched this place, marking the region as non-strategic in 1944. That decision left the bunker sealed in time, frozen like a dark capsule of history. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, as if the air itself had been poisoned by what had once happened there. Researchers later discovered traces of crystallized nerve agents, blackboards filled with strange equations about collapsing brain waves, and a mysterious red folder labeled Naval Kern. None of this was supposed to surface. This bunker wasn't built like a normal military shelter. It was designed for something far stranger and far more terrifying. Every detail suggested it was part of a black program hidden from even the highest levels of command. What secrets did this underground world guard, and why was it left untouched for nearly 80 years? The truth was only beginning to unfold. Inside the heart of Luftwaffe's Operation Bunker, when the sealed chambers of the Luftwaffe's Operation Bunker were finally studied, the scale of what was hidden became clearer. This was not a simple wartime shelter for soldiers or supplies. Deep inside were rooms lined with steel and reinforced concrete, built with precision far beyond ordinary bunkers of World War II. The deeper researchers went, the more unsettling the evidence became. Blackboards stood untouched, their surfaces filled with chalked equations, not of strategy or logistics, but of brainwave collapse and neurological patterns. These were not the calculations of generals. They were the work of scientists pushing human biology past its limits. Shelves were stacked with sealed glass vials, some labeled with chemical shorthand, others marked only with skulls and crossbones. In corners of the rooms, crystallized residue clung to shattered tanks, remnants of nerve agents that once flowed through the chambers. The strangest discovery was a red folder marked with the chilling title, Naval Kern. No one knew what it meant. No staff rosters, no design blueprints, only that single phrase repeated in archives. It became clear this was no defensive base. This was a place where boundaries were crossed, where the line between science and cruelty was erased. The Luftwaffe's hidden bunker was not for survival, it was for experimentation. Crystallized nerve agents and brainwave equations. In one chamber of the bunker, the air was heavy with dust, but the evidence remained sharp. Tables were covered in glassware, flasks frozen in time, and pipettes crusted with old residue. When scientists examined the remains, they discovered crystallized traces of deadly nerve agents. These were not simple poisons. They were compounds linked to Tabun and Sarin, the same chemicals Nazi Germany had secretly weaponized long before the world knew their names. Unlike other facilities, this bunker did not focus on mass production. Instead, it seemed designed for small, precise experiments, each one leaving behind toxic fingerprints of its purpose. But the chemicals were only half the story. On the blackboard still standing after decades, chalked equations described something far stranger. They weren't just formulas for mixing compounds. They mapped brainwave collapse, neurological interference, and what appeared to be attempts at breaking the limits of human consciousness. It looked like chemistry fused with psychology, written in symbols both scientific and cryptic. Why would the Luftwaffe need such equations? The answer was chilling: to explore ways of unlocking or destroying the human mind itself. The crystallized nerve agents were weapons, yes, but the blackboards revealed something more, a blueprint for psychological warfare. The red folder marked Naval Kern. Among the scattered files and dust-covered cabinets, one object drew immediate attention. A single red folder stamped with the words Naval Kern. Unlike the other documents, which carried cold chemical labels and test numbers, this folder looked deliberate, almost theatrical, as if someone wanted it to stand apart. Inside were diagrams, coded notes, and references to something never mentioned in official Reich archives. No staff lists, no operational orders. Just vague schematics tied to experiments no one had dared admit existed. Researchers who first opened it were stunned. The language inside spoke of Kern, or core, hinting at a central project, possibly the heart of everything conducted in the bunker. What made it even more disturbing was its context. Nearby lay photographs of human subjects, tagged and slumped in fog chambers with the code S14 scribbled beside them. The folder seemed connected, an instruction manual for experiments that blurred the line between chemical warfare and human manipulation. Historians struggled to decode the phrase Naval Kern. Some speculated it meant fog core, tying it to later whispers of Project Nebel. Whatever its meaning, the red folder proved one thing: the bunker wasn't random chaos. It was organized, structured, built around one central idea, an idea so secret it survived only in a single crimson file. Photographs of human test subjects S14, tucked between rusted drawers and sealed boxes, investigators uncovered something more haunting than chemicals or equations. Photographs. They were black and white images, blurred at the edges, but sharp enough to freeze the horror forever. Each photo showed human test subjects locked inside fog chambers, their bodies slumped, their faces hidden in mist. The tags were clinical, cold S14. No names, no histories, just numbers. In one series, the subject sat upright at first, then slowly collapsed as the haze thickened. On another image, a faint scribble read, "Pays 3. No response." Those words carried the weight of death. The photographs were evidence that theories of human experimentation were not rumors but grim reality. These were not battlefield casualties. They were controlled trials, logged step by step, as if lives were reduced to lines in a ledger. Researchers later noted the strange way the subjects' postures reflected fear, even when their faces were blurred. It wasn't just chemical exposure, it was psychological collapse captured frame by frame. For decades, whispers had spoken of secret Nazi trials too dark for official records. Here was the proof. The subject, called S14, became the most chilling symbol of the bunker's legacy. A human life erased into a number. The mystery of V49 said the deeper researchers dug into wartime archives, the more one strange name kept appearing: V49 Süd. It was the only designation ever connected to the hidden bunker. No staff rosters, no design plans, no detailed orders, just this short code buried in dusty files. Unlike other Nazi facilities which had clear military purposes, rockets, weapons, or supply lines, this one seemed wrapped in deliberate obscurity. Why give it a name yet erase every trace of its function? That mystery has haunted historians for decades. Comparing declassified aerial photographs from the 1940s with modern scans revealed something shocking. V49 Süd wasn't a lone site. It was one node in a much larger network of underground bunkers stretching across Europe during the final years of the war. Notes recovered from Blizna and Peenem and hinted at links to chemical black programs. Projects so secret they didn't even reach standard Reich archives. Some experts believe V49 Süd may have been a testing ground for the darkest branch of chemical warfare research. Others argue it was an experimental lab designed for something entirely new, an intersection of chemicals, sound, and psychology. Whatever the truth, V49 Süd was more than a bunker. It was a question mark carved into history, a place built for a purpose no one was supposed to uncover. A wider underground network of Nazi facilities. When researchers studied maps of the 1940s and compared them with newly declassified aerial photos, a chilling pattern emerged. V49 Süd was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of a hidden web of underground complexes scattered across Central Europe. These facilities were built late in the war, when Nazi Germany was desperate, pouring resources into secret programs meant to tip the balance. Some were already known: Peenem MD for rockets, Blizna for missile testing, but others, like V49 Süd, had no public record. Together, they hinted at a broader black network, shielded from both Allied intelligence and even standard Wehrmacht command. What stood out was how deliberately hidden they were. Many sites were buried under forests or camouflaged into hillsides, marked non-strategic in Allied files so they would be spared from bombing campaigns. This gave the Nazis rare safe zones to continue their most secretive projects even as the Reich crumbled. V49 Süd, with its chemical residues and neurological experiments, may have been only one branch of a much larger effort. If these facilities were connected, then Germany wasn't just experimenting with rockets and nerve gas. It was weaving together science, psychology, and occult symbols in ways still not fully understood. Each discovery deepened the fear that V49 Süd was only the beginning. Nerve agents, Tabun and Sarin origins. To understand the true danger of V49 Süd, we have to look back at the origins of Nazi chemical research. In 1936, German chemist Gerhard Schrader accidentally synthesized a compound that would change warfare forever: Tabun. It was the first modern nerve agent, a substance so lethal that even a drop on the skin could kill within minutes. By 1942, Nazi scientists were already producing Tabun in massive quantities at a plant in Dyernfurth, Poland. Soon after came Sarin, even more volatile and deadly, designed to attack the nervous system and shut it down almost instantly. These chemicals represented a new frontier, an invisible weapon capable of mass destruction without leaving bullet holes or bomb craters. But the Dyernfurth plant was eventually destroyed, and Allied forces assumed much of Germany's nerve agent supply was eliminated. That left an unanswered question: where did the remaining stockpiles and experiments go? V49 Süd might hold the key. Crystallized residues inside the bunker matched the byproducts of nerve agent synthesis. Unlike battlefield deployment, these samples suggested precision testing, experiments on controlled subjects rather than enemy armies. The Nazis had weaponized the unseen, poisons that could paralyze or kill without a trace. V49 Süd seemed less like a factory and more like a laboratory for pushing these deadly discoveries into darker, uncharted territory. The Untouched facility. Why the Allies ignored it. One of the strangest details about V49 Süd is that the Allies never touched it. In 1944, intelligence documents marked the entire region as non-strategic. That single word sealed its fate. No bombs were dropped, no reconnaissance flights were ordered, no eyes ever saw what lay beneath the forest. While cities burned and factories crumbled, V49 Süd remained untouched, frozen in time. To modern researchers, this is one of the greatest mysteries. Was it oversight, or was there a deliberate effort to keep this site hidden even during the war? The result was a chamber perfectly preserved for nearly 80 years. When investigators entered in 2022, they weren't stepping into ruins. They were walking into a time capsule. Glass flasks still stood upright on tables, chalk marks still clung to boards, and even faint traces of chemicals lingered in the air. It was as if the scientists had just left, expecting to return. The untouched nature of the bunker made it uniquely valuable to historians, but also terrifying. Unlike bombed-out labs or destroyed sites, nothing here had been erased. Every file, every experiment, every hidden chamber survived intact, raising one haunting thought: maybe someone intended for it to be found much later. The East German Defector and the Burning Mist, nearly 2 decades after the war. A chilling clue surfaced from an unlikely source. In 1963, an East German defector was debriefed in the West, and among his testimony was a strange line that stood out: a mountain cell where the mist burns skin. At the time, intelligence officers dismissed it as Cold War paranoia, another story meant to sow fear. But decades later, when handwritten notebooks were recovered inside V49 Süd, that exact phrase appeared again, word for word. Suddenly, the defector's warning wasn't fiction. It was evidence. The description matched what researchers later found inside the bunker. Traces of chemical byproducts, nerve agents, and strange compounds designed to linger in the air like fog. But this was no ordinary gas. It didn't simply choke or suffocate. It burned, it disoriented, and it broke people down from the inside. That chilling consistency between testimony and physical evidence cracked the mystery wide open. The so-called burning mist was not a rumor. It was a weapon, and the defector's words suggested that whispers of V49 Süd's existence were circulating long before the world officially uncovered it. For the first time, history had to reckon with the possibility that the Nazis' darkest experiments were never fully buried. The fog weapon. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer one phrase became: Project Nebel, or Project Fog. At first it sounded vague, even harmless, but the evidence told a darker story. Notes and diagrams suggested it wasn't about creating a lethal gas that killed instantly. Instead, it described something far more insidious: a fog designed to weaken the mind. Witness accounts spoke of disorientation, confusion, and neurological collapse, not choking or bleeding. This was not a weapon meant to leave obvious corpses. It was meant to erase resistance silently. Inside the bunker, researchers found schematics for dispersal systems unlike anything else of the time. Aerosol vents were paired with vibration generators, hinting that sound and chemistry were being combined into a single weapon. The blackboards confirmed this: overlapping frequencies, neurological interference equations, and references to collapse through sound field overlap. In other words, the fog wasn't just chemical, it was psychological. Project Nebel seemed to be a strategy for controlling the battlefield without bullets, to make soldiers unable to fight without leaving visible wounds. It blurred the line between science, terror, and something disturbingly futuristic. The Nazis weren't just experimenting with poison, they were trying to rewrite the rules of warfare itself. Lead and zinc walls. As researchers mapped out the hidden chambers of V49 Süd, one detail stood out above all others: the walls. Unlike ordinary bunkers built only with concrete and steel, these rooms were lined with lead sheets and zinc panels, layer upon layer of shielding. At first, the assumption was radiation protection, as if nuclear materials might have been stored there. But tests revealed no isotopes, no trace of atomic work. That left another disturbing explanation: the shielding was meant to block something else. Sound waves, chemical seepage, or even frequencies that could not be allowed to escape. Why would a chemical weapons lab need this kind of insulation? The answer likely ties back to Project Nebel. If sound and vibration were being used to activate or control airborne compounds, then the walls themselves became part of the experiment. They were not just barriers. They were cages designed to trap whatever forces were being unleashed inside. The idea that a chamber was purpose-built to contain sound-driven chemical fog was unlike anything seen in other Nazi projects. It suggested the experiments at V49 Süd were not just dangerous, they were unstable, volatile, and potentially catastrophic if released. The walls were not protecting those inside. They were protecting the outside world from whatever was happening within. Radars and Nazi rocket program connections hidden within V49 Süd were features that didn't belong in a chemical bunker. Radar systems. Not one, but 6 massive radar arrays had once been installed in the area, their remains matching architectural elements linked to Pinum and Blizna, the famous Nazi rocket research hubs. These were the same facilities responsible for the V2 rocket program, Hitler's so-called Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons. But unlike those sites, V49 Süd had no missile silos, no launch pads, and no storage for rockets. Instead, it contained laboratories, sealed chambers, and medical wings. So why the radar? Researchers believe the radar systems were not about tracking aircraft, but about testing frequencies. possibly tied to the strange experiments hinted at in the Naval files. Some diagrams found at the site resembled sonic dispersal technology, and the radar may have been used to measure or control the spread of fog compounds. Others suggest it acted as shielding, redirecting signals away to avoid Allied detection. The link to Nazi rocketry made the bunker even more suspicious. If rocket scientists were feeding data into V49 Süd, then this was not an isolated experiment. It was part of the Reich's larger obsession with advanced weapons. The radars hinted that V49 Süd was more than a lab. It was an experimental hub connecting science, warfare, and something far stranger. The terrifying medical wing, deep inside V49 Süd, past the reinforced halls and sealed chambers, investigators uncovered the most disturbing section of all, the medical wing. Unlike ordinary wartime infirmaries, this area was not built for healing. It was built for testing. Rows of steel tables with leather restraints stood rusting under cold light rigs. Drains were carved into the floors, stained by time, suggesting fluids once flowed freely through the room. Primitive biometric equipment lay scattered: blood collection tubes, heart monitors, and crude devices resembling early EEG machines. Everything pointed to one grim purpose: human experimentation. The design of the wing revealed a chilling logic. One entire chamber was lined in thick lead panels, bolted edge to edge, not painted, but solid sheets. With no traces of radiation found, historians believe the shielding was intended to contain sound frequencies or chemical fog during trials. This meant the subjects strapped to those tables weren't just exposed to toxins. They were trapped inside carefully engineered sensory cages. The medical wing was where science and cruelty intersected, where Project Nebel's fog and frequencies met living test subjects. No staff records survived, but the rooms spoke for themselves. This was not treatment. It was controlled suffering, the cold machinery of experiments designed to push the human body beyond its breaking point. Opening the sealed door in 2022, for nearly 80 years, V49 Süd lay hidden, sealed tight behind a slab of rusted steel buried beneath moss and earth. There were no hinges, no handles, just a pressure-sealed wall that looked more like a vault than a door. When archaeologists and military historians finally gained clearance in the summer of 2022, they knew they were about to step into a frozen moment of history. Czech heritage officials oversaw the process as plasma cutters, hydraulic jacks, and magnetic sensors were brought in. Even with modern tools, the door resisted for hours, as if it was never meant to be opened again. Some experts speculated it wasn't to keep outsiders away, it was to keep something inside. When the steel finally cracked, no one rushed in. Instead, they sent a drone first, lightweight, fitted with thermal cameras and gas sensors. What it revealed was chilling. The chamber was flooded with nitrogen, suffocating and oxygen-deprived, laced with traces of phosphorus compounds and chlorinated hydrocarbons. These weren't just old chemicals, they were the toxic fingerprints of nerve agent production. The team had to ventilate the space carefully, knowing that disturbing the balance could destroy priceless evidence. For the first time since World War II, the secrets of V49 Süd were about to be seen by human eyes. Nitrogen nerve gas and poison vials. Once the bunker was ventilated and safe to enter, the team stepped into a nightmare frozen in time. The air was still heavy, the walls slick with condensation, and every surface carried the weight of decades. Rows of metal tables stood undisturbed, with flasks still upright and pipettes coated in crystallized residue. Glass tanks lined the walls. Some shattered, others sealed so tight that rubber stoppers cracked under pressure. Inside drawers, they found hundreds of small vials, their faded labels written in German shorthand. Some carried words like gift gas, poison gas. Others bore the unmistakable skull and crossbones. But among these familiar warnings was something worse. Certain vials carried a strange symbol, the black sun, the occult insignia tied to the SS. That symbol had no place in a laboratory, yet here it was, stamped on chemical samples. It hinted that the work at V49 Süd wasn't purely scientific. It strayed into something darker, where ideology and ritual merged with experimentation. The mixture of nitrogen, nerve agent byproducts, and occult marked vials created an atmosphere of dread. This wasn't just a chemical stockpile. It was evidence of a project that deliberately blurred the line between warfare, psychology, and the unknown. For the team, each discovery raised one terrifying question: what had these chemicals really been used for? The Black Sun and occult SS symbols, among the bunker's most unsettling discoveries, were markings that had nothing to do with chemistry or science. Scrawled across vials, stamped onto crates, and etched into walls was the Black Sun, a symbol tied to Heinrich Himmler's SS occult order. This emblem was never an official Reich insignia. It belonged to the secretive, ritualistic branch of the SS obsessed with mysticism and ancient power. Its presence inside V49 Süd transformed the lab from a purely scientific site into something far stranger, a place where occult ideology collided with advanced experimentation. Historians immediately connected the Black Sun to Weilsburg Castle, Himmler's headquarters for esoteric studies and unsanctioned rituals. Finding the same symbol inside a chemical bunker suggested a chilling overlap between pseudoscience and cutting-edge weapons research. The occult wasn't just a distraction for a handful of SS officers. It may have been woven into the Reich's black projects. Here, science and ritual sat side by side, equations about brainwave collapse on one board, occult symbols carved into equipment nearby. It implied the work at V49 Süd wasn't just about killing. It was about unlocking control over the human mind and spirit, blending fear, superstition, and technology into one weaponized vision. The Black Sun revealed this lab wasn't merely a bunker. It was a ritual site. Diagrams of a brain attack weapon. In a locked cabinet within the bunker, investigators found the most revealing document yet. A red folder labeled Nebelkern, or Fog Core. Inside were diagrams, charts, and schematics unlike anything seen before. At first glance, they looked like standard dispersal systems, but closer inspection showed something extraordinary: vibration generators wired into aerosol vents, and what appeared to be an early prototype of a sonic transducer. Modern experts recognized the design instantly. It resembled the same technology now used in crowd control, devices that manipulate sound waves to overwhelm the brain. But these papers weren't from the 1970s or 80s. They were dated to 1943. The diagrams implied the fog wasn't simply meant to poison the lungs. It was engineered to target the brain. Frequencies, overlapping sound fields, and chemical dispersal were combined to produce neurological collapse. On one chalkboard, still intact, a phrase had been underlined 3 times: neurological collapse through sound field overlap. This was not ordinary chemical warfare. It was psychological warfare at its most advanced, decades ahead of its time. The Nebelkern papers suggested that V49 Süd was more than a lab. It was the birthplace of a weapon designed not to kill soldiers outright, but to strip away their ability to think, resist, or even remain conscious. Neurological collapse through sound fields. On the blackboards left standing inside V49 Süd, one phrase appeared again and again, underlined with force: Neurologische Zusammenbruch durch schnelle Berlagerung. Neurological collapse through sound field overlap. This chilling statement summarized the true aim of the bunker's experiments. The scientists here weren't just mixing gases, they were exploring how frequencies, vibrations, and fog compounds could be combined to attack the brain itself. By layering sound waves at specific amplitudes, they believed they could overload neural activity, breaking down thought, speech, and memory in minutes. Notes in the recovered files described test phases in clinical detail. Subjects exposed to fog and sound reported dizziness, tremors, and loss of coordination. By Phase 3, entries read simply, "No response." Unlike bullets or bombs, this weapon left no visible wounds. Instead, it targeted the invisible wiring of the mind, collapsing it from within. Modern researchers who reviewed the equations admitted they mirrored techniques only seriously studied decades later in defense laboratories. Yet here they were, written in chalk in 1943. V49 Süd was not just a chemical weapons site, it was an early blueprint for sensory and psychological warfare. The Nazis had imagined a weapon that could silence a brain as easily as a gun silences a body. The crystal sphere and the strange machine. In one of the deeper chambers of V49 Süd, investigators uncovered an object unlike anything else in the bunker. A sealed container holding a crystal sphere suspended in amber-colored gel. No larger than a tennis ball, it seemed to pulse faintly under ultraviolet light, as though alive. The label on its casing read Nebelkern Stabilizer, linking it directly to the fog experiments. No one could explain how it worked, but its presence suggested the Nazis had discovered or engineered a material that reacted to frequency or chemical dispersal. Some historians even compared it to reports from 1945, when Allied forces briefly mentioned a mysterious crystal anomaly near Nordhausen before the evidence disappeared. Nearby stood an equally bizarre machine, a hybrid of centrifuge and acoustic modulator covered in wires and dust. Its control panel bore 3 dials: amplitude, frequenz, and Nebelkern. Investigators speculated this was the dispersal core, designed to activate the fog weapon using vibration and sound. If true, the sphere and the machine formed the heart of Project Nebel, one a strange stabilizer, the other its trigger. Together, they hinted that V49 Süd wasn't only testing chemicals, it was experimenting with an entirely new kind of warfare, one that blurred the line between physical science and something far more mysterious. Experiment logs and Camp 13 transfers. Behind a false wall in V49 Süd, investigators uncovered a stack of handwritten records. Dozens of pages, neatly dated between June 1943 and October 1944. Each entry followed the same formula: subject number, compound used, modifiers applied, exposure method, and final result. The language was cold, detached, as if human lives were nothing more than data points. Some entries listed free village, volunteers, but many others recorded transfers from a place labeled only as Camp 13. That name does not appear in official Nazi registries, yet historians instantly recognized it. Camp 13 was a whispered legend, an unofficial black site near Dachau, rumored to house experiments too dark even for the SS's public record. The logs confirmed the whispers. Victims were subjected to chemical fog, sound waves, and varying temperatures. The results were clinical: subject speech loss after 8 minutes, no motor response, phase 3, brain activity ceased. These weren't trials. They were executions documented as science. The most haunting discovery came with the repetition of one code, IS-14. It appeared again and again, tied to the same subject across multiple phases. Whoever S-14 was, they became the central figure of V49 Süd's experiments. Their suffering was not an accident. It was the cornerstone of Project Nebel's dark research. The horrifying truth of human experiments. The final rooms of V49 Süd erased any doubt about what the bunker had been built for. Rows of steel tables with leather restraints, drains cut into the floor, and crude biometric devices told the story more clearly than any file could. This was not a storage site or a laboratory for theory. It was a place where people were strapped down and used as test material. The logs confirmed it, listing compounds, exposure times, and coldly measured outcomes. The words were chillingly simple: phase 3, no response. For the victims, it meant death. What shocked historians most was the precision. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were structured experiments, carefully logged, repeated, and refined. Some victims were taken from Camp 13, a site so secret it never appeared in official SS archives. Here, they were reduced to numbers, their lives erased in pursuit of a weapon designed to break the human mind. One recovered notebook, written by a man believed to be Dr. K. Behrens, described Subject S-440 to beg to stop. I told them to record the vocal tremors. That line froze the room. The horror of V49 Süd was not just in its chemicals or machines. It was in the deliberate, systematic use of human beings as test subjects for a weapon decades ahead of its time.